Alright, now we are going to study a concept which is undoubtedly the most important concept taught in short-run producer theory, and it's known as marginal productivity of labor. Why am I calling it the most important concept in short-run producer theory? Because all the graphs, all the curves that we are going to plot, 3 product curves and 7 cost curves, all these cost curves will be drawn using the concept of marginal productivity of labor, right? And I would like to explain this concept with the help of an example. Alright, these are our 4 columns: quantity of labor, quantity of capital, total productivity yani total output, and marginal productivity of labor. I'll tell you later what is meant by marginal productivity. Now let's suppose there is a person who decides to open a restaurant, right? And he decides to become the first worker. He does the entire work himself: grocery cutting, food preparation, serving the customers. He does the entire work himself, right? And let's say he has 3 sets of cooking utensils. Now remember, we are studying short run producer theory, and I have already told you that in short run, quantity of capital is fixed. Capital is treated as a fixed factor of production. So this owner cannot alter his quantity of capital. He, for example, cannot purchase an additional cooking utensil, right? Now let's say when he is the only worker working in the restaurant, total output produced is 1 plate of a menu item per hour rakh lete hain, right? What is his marginal productivity? Marginal productivity कहते हैं किसको है? The word marginal means additional. So marginal productivity is the additional output produced after the arrival of a new worker. Yeah, it is the additional output produced when a new worker is hired. So in this case, your total productivity is same as marginal productivity, because after the arrival of the first worker, 1 additional output is produced. So here total output is equal to marginal output. Alright, now let's say he decides to hire a second worker, right? Quantity of capital remains same because we are in the short run. Now these 2 workers, they decide to distribute the assignment. The owner, let's say, decides to do grocery cutting, and the second worker does food preparation and serving the customers, right? Now what happens? Specialization sets in. Each one of them becomes an expert in his respective area. So let's say together they produce 3 plates of a menu item, right? Their total productivity is 3 plates of a menu item. Now some of you might be thinking that when 1 worker is producing 1 plate of a menu item, then 2 workers should be producing 2 plates of a menu item. Why have I mentioned 3 plates of a menu item? The reason is, I'm telling you again, specialization. After the arrival of the new worker, when they distributed the assignments, each one of them became an expert in his respective area. The first worker became even more productive, right? So their total productivity increases. What is the marginal productivity of the second worker? What is the marginal productivity after the arrival of the second worker? इस statement का मतलब क्या है? How much additional output is produced after the arrival of the second worker? When only 1 worker was producing, 1 plate of a menu item was produced. Now when there are 2 workers working, 3 plates of a menu item are produced. So what is the additional output produced after the arrival of the second worker? 2 plates of a menu item. So marginal productivity after the arrival of the second worker is 2 plates of a menu item, right? Now let's say the owner decides to hire a third worker. Quantity of capital remains same because we are in the short run, and let's say together they produce. Now what happens? More specialization sets in. Each one of them becomes even more expert in his respective area. So let's say total productivity increases from 3 plates to 6 plates. What is the marginal productivity after the arrival of the third worker? 6 minus 3, 3 plates of a menu item, right? So what's your observation until now? That as you start hiring more and more workers, your marginal productivity is increasing from 1 to 2 to 3 plates, right? And why is it happening? Because of specialization. This phenomenon is known as increasing marginal productivity of labor. I'll write it later, right? Increasing marginal productivity of labor. How do you define it? That as more and more workers are hired, the change in output is bigger and bigger. More and more additional output is produced, right? Now let's say ये जो trend है of increasing marginal productivity, it does not continue for long, because beyond some point, as you continue hiring more workers, the story changes. Let's suppose this owner, he decides to hire a fourth worker. Quantity of capital remains same. Now what happens, I want you to imagine a situation in which all cooking utensils are already engaged. Therefore, this fourth worker doesn't get a separate cooking utensil to work with, right? And since we are in the short run, we cannot purchase a new cooking utensil and hand it over to him. So what happens? This fourth worker has to be engaged in the same cooking utensil on which some other worker is already working. So overcrowding takes place. Right? What happens? Total productivity अब भी बढ़ती है, but at a slower rate. Let's say from 6 plates of a menu item to 8 plates of a menu item. Right? What happens to marginal productivity? Now, how many additional plates are produced? 8 minus 6, 2 plates of a menu item. Right? This is the first time your marginal productivity has decreased. Let's say the owner now decides to hire a fifth worker. Cooking utensils remain same. And total productivity अब भी मैंने बढ़ाई है, but at an even slower rate, from 8 plates to 9 plates. What is your marginal productivity? 1 plate of a menu item, right? Let's say now he decides to hire a sixth worker, right? Hire a sixth worker. Quantity of capital remains same. Total productivity this time, total productivity also remains same, right? 9 plates of a menu item. What happens to the marginal productivity after the arrival of the, how many workers are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 workers. Marginal productivity is 0 because no additional output is produced. अब ये जो phenomenon है in which your marginal productivity decreased from 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, this is known as diminishing marginal productivity of labor. And why is it happening? Because you are adding more and more labor to a fixed quantity of capital. So our labor, every successive labor is not getting enough space, enough opportunity to perform. So marginal productivity is falling, right? Total productivity is increasing at a slower and slower rate. Marginal productivity is falling, right? In case you are still facing difficulty in understanding the concept of marginal productivity, then I want you to imagine a situation, right? Imagine a classroom in which there is one teacher and many students. Now this teacher has to impart learning, impart education, and at the same time she has to control rowdy students, right? Now let's say another teacher is assigned to this class whose sole responsibility is to control the rowdy students. So our first teacher is going to impart learning and our second teacher is going to control rowdy students. What will happen? Our learning session is going to improve. This is increasing marginal productivity of labor, right? But let's say you keep on adding more and more teachers to the same classroom. I know this is very hypothetical, but I'm telling this just to help you understand. If you keep on adding more and more teachers to the classroom, the learning session will be extremely disrupted. This is diminishing marginal productivity of labor. So in the case of restaurant, the restaurant is getting more and more crowded, right? So your marginal productivity is falling. Now let's say the restaurant owner decides to hire a seventh worker. Quantity of capital is same. This seventh worker was absolutely not required because he damages the entire production process. In this time, total productivity instead of increasing begins to decrease. This is the first time your total productivity has fallen, right? From 9 plates to 8 plates. What about marginal productivity of the seventh worker? No additional output is produced, rather one less unit of output is produced, right? So marginal productivity is -1. This is known as negative marginal productivity of labor, right? So we have been introduced to 3 types of terminologies: increasing, marginal productivity of labor. This was happening whenever marginal productivity increased from 1 plate of a menu item to 2 plates of a menu item and then to 3 plates of a menu item. And why was that happening? Because of specialization. Then we have decreasing marginal productivity of labor whenever marginal productivity was falling from 3 to 2 to 1 to 0. Why was that happening? Because of overcrowding, because we were adding more and more labor to a fixed quantity of capital, right? Then in the end we had negative marginal productivity of labor. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this diagram, this graphical representation, into a table in the next video.